This is the story of a neighborhood under siege, not by criminals in the shadows, but by men in fake uniforms walking brazenly in the daylight. It's about intimidation disguised as authority, a black veteran who only wanted peace with his wife, and the moment he realized silence would destroy more than noise ever could. What began as petty threats over mailboxes and lawns exploded into violence, a slap across his wife's face, and a fight that turned an entire community upside down. This is not just about a family standing their ground. It's about exposing lies, reclaiming dignity, and discovering how courage spreads when one man finally says, "Enough." Marcus Holloway thought he had finally found peace. After 20 years in the Navy SEALs, with deployments that had taken him through deserts, jungles, and more nights of gunfire than he cared to remember, all he wanted was a quiet life with his wife Denise. Georgia seemed like the right place for it. Not the busy sprawl of Atlanta, but a smaller town on the outskirts, Brookstone, where the streets curved like ribbons through patches of pine and magnolia. The real estate brochure had promised serenity: brick homes, tidy lawns, children riding bicycles without fear, and neighbors who waved as they carried groceries from their cars. For Marcus, who had once lived in a world where every glance could hide a threat, that promise was golden. At first, Brookstone delivered. Denise planted roses along the front porch. Marcus kept the lawn neatly trimmed, enjoying the simple rhythm of pushing the mower, the hum replacing the whine of helicopters he still sometimes heard in his dreams. The neighbors introduced themselves politely. Some asked about his time in the service, and he always smiled, careful to keep his answers vague. He wasn't there to talk about war. He was there to live again. But peace, Marcus knew, was fragile. It happened 2 weeks after moving in. Marcus was fixing the porch light when a black SUV rolled slowly down the cul-de-sac. 2 men stepped out, wearing dark uniforms with patches that looked official but unfamiliar. Across their chests, bold letters read, "HOA Enforcement." Marcus frowned. He had never seen an HOA with its own enforcers. One of the men, tall and stocky, approached with a clipboard. "Afternoon, sir. We've had some reports. Your garbage bins were left out too long last week." Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "I pulled them in the same day the truck came." "Not what our notes say," the man replied. His partner circled the yard, eyes scanning like a security guard. Denise stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. "Is there a problem?" "Just routine checks," the tall one said. "This neighborhood has standards." Marcus locked eyes with him. Something about the man's stance was wrong. Too aggressive for a homeowners association, too casual for law enforcement. He'd seen that kind of body language before, in places where intimidation was currency. "Appreciate your concern," Marcus said evenly. "But I know the rules. You won't find a problem here." The man held his gaze for a long beat before scribbling something on the clipboard. "We'll be watching." Then they left, SUV rumbling down the street. Denise exhaled. "What was that?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He was still watching the taillights disappear. "Not what they claim to be," he muttered finally. Word spread quickly. At the mailbox the next day, Carol Jenkins, an elderly neighbor with sharp eyes, leaned close. "They call themselves HOA cops," she whispered. "Started showing up last year. No one voted for them. They just appeared." "People let them?" Marcus asked. Carol's lips pressed thin. "Most folks are too afraid to argue. They hand out fines, threaten liens. They say they are protecting property values." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. He had fought in places where men with guns made up their own rules. He hadn't expected to face it again in suburban Georgia, except now the weapons weren't rifles, but fear, paperwork, and the illusion of authority. When he told Denise, she shook her head. "We moved here for peace, Marcus. Don't get involved. Please." He kissed her forehead and promised, but deep inside, he knew promises like that were hard to keep. The visits continued. Sometimes it was the garbage bins. Sometimes the angle of the American flag Marcus kept on the porch. Once, they claimed his grass was a half-inch too long, though he had mowed the day before. Each time, Marcus remained calm, his voice steady. But Denise noticed the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw locked after the SUV left. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Denise said softly, "You can't let them get under your skin." Marcus nodded, but his eyes stayed on the street. They're not just here to enforce rules. They're here to control. And control, Marcus knew, always escalated. It came on a Thursday. Marcus was walking back from the corner store when he saw the SUV parked outside his house. Denise was on the porch, her hands clutching the railing. One of the fake officers stood too close to her, clipboard in hand. His partner leaned against the railing, smirking. Marcus's pace quickened, his vision narrowing. He didn't shout, didn't run. He just approached, each step measured, like he had done on countless missions. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. The taller man turned. "Your wife doesn't seem to understand compliance." Marcus stopped at the bottom of the steps. His gaze locked on the man's. "Step back. Now." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the man gave a mocking half-smile and backed away. "We'll be back," he said, climbing into the SUV. The vehicle rolled off, leaving tire marks on the curb. Denise's hands were trembling. "Marcus, this isn't normal." He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "I know." His voice was steady, but inside, a storm was building. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of notices the so-called HOA cops had left. Each one was a scar, a reminder that peace was being chipped away piece by piece. He thought about his years overseas, the things he had endured, the men he had faced down. He had come home to escape all that. Yet here it was again: intimidation, abuse of power, the pretense of authority. He glanced toward the bedroom, where Denise slept. She believed in peace, in avoiding conflict. And Marcus wanted that too. But he also knew something she didn't. People who thrived on control never stopped on their own. They had to be stopped. And as he sat there in the silence of his kitchen in Brookstone, Georgia, Marcus Holloway realized something chilling. The battle he thought he had left behind had just followed him home. The days in Brookstone began to feel less like a promise and more like a test. Marcus Holloway could sense it in the air each morning when he stepped out to grab the paper. Neighbors gave polite smiles, but their eyes flickered nervously toward the black SUV that seemed to roam the streets at odd hours, idling too long at corners, headlights off when it should have been too dark to see. At first, he thought he was imagining it. Too many years of scanning perimeters, of reading shadows. But Denise noticed too. She whispered one night in bed, "They're watching us." Marcus didn't reply. He didn't want to confirm her fear. Weeks passed and the so-called HOA cops came back often. Their uniforms looked just close enough to official that a stranger might mistake them for sheriff's deputies. Their clipboards, their smug expressions, the way they walked right up to a porch like they owned it, it was all theater. But it worked. Neighbors fell silent when they approached, nodding in compliance, writing checks for fines they didn't understand. Marcus watched from his porch one afternoon as they berated an older couple for leaving wind chimes out past quiet hours. The couple apologized and removed them immediately. That night Denise said softly, "They've trained everyone." The harassment against Marcus and Denise sharpened. Their mailbox was cited for being an unapproved shade of black, even though it matched 3 others on the street. A notice claimed their lawn was an inch too long, though Marcus had mowed it the day before. Once, Marcus found a ticket taped to his front door accusing him of unauthorized guests. It was from the night his sister Jenna and her husband had come for dinner. Denise wanted to rip it up. Marcus told her to save every single one. He stacked them in a folder in his office like evidence waiting for trial. It wasn't just paper. They began circling when Denise was home alone. One Saturday, she was kneeling in the garden when 2 men stepped out of the SUV, cameras in hand. They photographed her car, the flowerbeds, even her. When Marcus came out, still in his workout clothes, they straightened but didn't back away. "Routine inspection," one said. Marcus stood inches from him, sweat dripping, muscles taut. "You point that camera at my wife again and you'll find out how routine my response is." The man smirked but lowered the phone. As the SUV rolled away, Denise's hands trembled in the soil. "This isn't rules, Marcus. It's hate." He wrapped his arms around her, but the words stuck in his throat. The final crack came on a humid evening in June. Marcus had gone to pick up groceries. When he returned, the SUV was parked crooked across his driveway. Denise stood on the porch, blocked by 2 men in uniform. Her voice was sharp but shaking. "I told you, You can't come inside without a warrant. Marcus's bags dropped to the ground. He closed the distance in 10 strides, fists clenched. Step away from my wife. The taller man didn't move. He leaned closer to Denise and hissed something Marcus couldn't hear. Then, quick as a whip, his hand shot out and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked louder than a rifle shot in Marcus's ears. Denise stumbled, clutching her cheek, eyes wide with shock. Marcus froze, not from fear, but from the sheer force of holding himself back. His training screamed restraint. His heart screamed revenge. His jaw tightened so hard it hurt. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he said quietly. The men smirked as if daring him. File a complaint, the shorter one sneered. They climbed into the SUV and peeled off, gravel spitting under their tires. Denise collapsed against Marcus, her shoulders shaking. He held her close, every muscle in his body screaming to chase them down, to end it there. But he knew better. These men wanted a fight on their terms. They wanted him to swing first so they could paint him as the aggressor. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction, not yet. That night, Denise pressed ice to her face while Marcus sat at the table surrounded by stacks of notices, photographs, and footage from his security cameras. We can't live like this, she whispered. Marcus stared at the folder in front of him, its weight heavy as stone. We won't, he answered. His voice was low but steady, the voice of a man who had led men into impossible battles and come back. But this time we won't fight with fists. We'll fight with truth. The next morning, Marcus called his old friend Daniel Price, a retired detective who now worked in private security. He showed him everything, the fake tickets, the threats, the footage of men circling his house like wolves. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This isn't an HOA. It's a scam. They set up a shell group, made fake uniforms, and started extorting people. And people let them, because they look official enough to scare. He leaned closer. Marcus, these guys picked the wrong man. With Daniel's help, Marcus began building a case. Every notice, every photo, every video clip was catalogued and backed up. Neighbors were quietly approached. At first, most were too afraid to speak. But as the days passed, small cracks appeared. Carol from down the street admitted she'd been fined for excessive holiday decorations. A young couple confessed they paid cash to avoid a lien that was never real. Piece by piece, a picture formed of fraud, intimidation, and fear. Denise still carried the bruise on her cheek, but her spirit hardened. They thought you'd stay silent, she told Marcus one night. But silence is what gives them power. Marcus looked at her, pride and pain mixing in his chest. She was right. He had tried to preserve peace, but peace without justice was just surrender. By the end of June, Marcus knew the line had been crossed. He had endured war zones, he had endured sleepless nights and scars that never healed. But nothing cut deeper than watching his wife struck in front of their own home. That moment changed everything. The men in the SUV thought they had shown power. All they had done was light a fuse. And Marcus Holloway, the man they believed they could bully like any other neighbor, was about to remind them what happens when you pick a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose. The bruise on Denise's face faded, but the memory of the slap didn't. For Marcus, it was like an ember under ash, quiet on the surface, but hot enough to ignite with the smallest spark. Every morning when he poured his coffee and saw her reflection in the kitchen window, he was reminded that his silence had cost something. He had sworn to protect her, and though he had kept his fists unclenched, the restraint gnawed at him. The men in the SUV thought they had won that day. But they hadn't understood who they were dealing with. Marcus had spent decades in the SEALs learning patience. Not the passive kind, but the tactical kind, the kind that let you wait in silence on a rooftop for hours, knowing the mission depended on timing, not impulse. That training was etched into him. And now, he told himself, this neighborhood was his mission. The first step was gathering allies. He started with Carol Jenkins. She was the one neighbor who had always been candid, the one who whispered truths at the mailbox. When Marcus showed her the footage from his security cameras, her hand covered her mouth. Lord have mercy, she muttered. We've all been pretending it's not this bad. It is, Marcus said simply. And it's going to get worse unless we do something. Carol's eyes flicked toward his house, then back to him. What can we do? Folks are scared. Scared people can still act, Marcus replied. They just need to know they're not alone. That weekend, Carol quietly introduced Marcus to a handful of others: the young couple who had paid cash to avoid a fake lien, the retired teacher who had been cited for holiday lights, the man 2 blocks over who had been told his dog violated noise ordinances, despite living in silence most days. Each had a story. Each carried resentment, but also fear. Marcus listened more than he spoke. He let them vent, let them relive the humiliation. Only at the end did he say, "You all know what's happening isn't real HOA business. It's fraud. It's intimidation. They're counting on you being too afraid to resist. I'm not afraid. And you don't have to be either." It wasn't a fiery speech. It was steady, matter-of-fact. And that was what made it land. People leaned forward, nodding. Someone asked, "What do we do?" For the first time since moving in, Marcus felt the tide shift. The SUV didn't stop coming. If anything, the patrols increased. The men strutted with more confidence, flashing fake IDs, scribbling notes on clipboards. But now, Marcus wasn't the only one documenting. Quietly, Carol began filming from behind her curtains. The young couple set up a doorbell camera. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now exchanged quick glances of recognition when the black vehicle rolled past. Marcus had given them a spark of solidarity. Denise worried. "They'll find out," she said one night as Marcus sorted through hours of footage on his laptop. "They'll know people are turning against them. And then what?" Marcus looked at her, his voice calm but unyielding. "Then they'll show their true colors. And when they do, we'll have everything we need to end this." She searched his face, seeing the same man who had left home years ago to fight battles she only understood in fragments. She reached for his hand. "Just promise me this won't consume you." Marcus kissed her hand gently. "It already has. But not in the way you think. This isn't about fighting. It's about finishing." By mid-July, Marcus and Daniel had compiled a dossier thick enough to make any prosecutor take notice. Pages of fake violations, timestamps from security footage, sworn statements from neighbors. Daniel, the former detective, leaned back in his chair one evening as they reviewed it all. "This isn't just harassment. This is organized extortion. They're posing as law enforcement. That's a felony." Marcus nodded. "Then it's time to put this in the right hands." But Daniel hesitated. Local police might not move fast enough. If these guys have been operating this long without being shut down, somebody's been looking the other way. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had seen that too many times in foreign towns, people in power ignoring wrongs because it was easier. Then we don't give them a choice. We bring the truth so loud they can't ignore it. The turning point came at a neighborhood barbecue, one of those events meant to feel casual, friendly, where people brought potato salad and grilled burgers while kids ran through sprinklers. But everyone knew it was more than that. Marcus had organized it quietly, framing it as community bonding. In reality, it was a meeting. As the sun dipped low and fireflies began to appear, Marcus stood near the picnic table and addressed the small crowd. His voice carried enough authority that conversations hushed without him raising it. "You all know why we are here," he began. "We came to Brookstone for peace. Instead, we've been living under intimidation. I've spent my life facing down bullies in every form they take. And I'll tell you the truth, they only win when we stay divided." Heads nodded. Eyes glistened with both fear and hope. "I'm not asking you to fight," Marcus continued. "I'm asking you to stand. Stand by telling the truth, by refusing to pay another fake fine, by recording every encounter, by signing your names to what you've seen. They can ignore one of us. They can't ignore all of us." There was a pause, then Carol stepped forward. Her voice trembled but carried. "I'll sign. I'll testify." One by one, others followed. Papers passed around. Pens scratched in the humid air. By the end of the night, Marcus had a stack of signatures and sworn accounts. More importantly, he had ignited something that no SUV could patrol away: courage. Of course, the men noticed. 2 nights later, Marcus awoke to the sound of tires screeching. He rushed outside to find his lawn vandalized, trash dumped across the yard, spray paint scrawled across his fence: "Comply or pay." Denise clutched his arm, fear in her eyes. "They know, Marcus. They know it's you." Marcus stared at the words, his chest heaving. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Good. because fear had changed sides. By the end of that week, the dossier was in the hands of county investigators. Journalists had begun sniffing around after Daniel leaked hints of a story. And Marcus, standing in the ruins of his defaced lawn, knew something with absolute certainty: the next move would not be theirs. It would be his. The spray paint didn't wash out on the first try. Marcus and Denise worked in the morning heat with sponges and a bucket of cleanser until their hands stung, but the letters, "comply or pay," clung to the wood grain like a dare. Neighbors watched from porches and windows. A few came over with rags and extra buckets. Others, frightened of taking sides, hovered at the edges of their lawns. Marcus said little. He kept his strokes even, his breathing steady, until the words faded to a pinkish ghost on the fence. When they finally stepped back, Denise squeezed his arm. "It won't be the last time," she said. "No," he answered, "but it'll be the last time it's easy." By then, the dossier had already left Brookstone. Daniel Price had delivered copies to the county DA's office, the sheriff's professional standards unit, and a state investigator he trusted from his years on the job. He'd also threaded the needle with a local reporter at the Pine Ridge Ledger, a woman named Elena Foster, who had a reputation for turning small-town silence into front-page noise. She called Marcus the next afternoon, the hum of a newsroom behind her. "I don't want a quote yet," she said. "I want proof. You've given me a start. If I show up with a camera, will you and your neighbors stand up on record?" Marcus looked at the half-scrubbed fence and the bruise that still yellowed Denise's cheek. "We are past whispers," he said. "Come." He didn't send a mass text. He walked. He knocked on doors and spoke softly on porches. Carol, the young couple who'd paid cash, the retired teacher, the dad with the so-called noisy dog, even the quiet man 2 streets over who had never made eye contact until now. He told them a photographer might come. He told them he couldn't promise safety, only truth and a chance to end the patrols for good. To his surprise, no one said no. Some hesitated. All said they were tired. Tired was fuel. 2 evenings later, Brookstone's Greenbelt felt more like a vigil than a park. Folks brought folding chairs and coolers, but nobody pretended this was a picnic. Elena arrived with one photographer and a MIC clip to her shirt. She didn't grandstand. She listened. One by one, people stepped forward and spoke their stories into her recorder. The fines, the threats, the officers who weren't officers, the fear of liens, the shame of paying to be left alone. When it was Denise's turn, her voice quivered for 3 words and then leveled into steel. "He slapped me," she said. "On my porch. Because I said come back with a warrant." Elena didn't interrupt. The camera blinked its red light, and the crowd went very still. Marcus stood behind his wife, hands crossed at the wrist, face quiet as a storm on the horizon. Word travels fast when people stop whispering. Within 48 hours, the Ledger ran a digital teaser: neighborhood HOA police accused of impersonation, extortion. It was careful, hedged with alleged, but the headline did its job. The patrols didn't stop. They got sloppier. Twice in the same day, the black SUV rolled down Brockton Court with its light bar flickering, a cheap Amazon strip wired to the dash. Once, they cited a teenager for open beverage because he carried an orange soda on the sidewalk. When his mother demanded a badge number, the shorter enforcer flashed a laminate that didn't list a county, then told her to call Compliance Central and gave a prepaid phone number. She called Marcus instead. Daniel, who had been patient for weeks, finally lost it. "We are done waiting," he told Marcus in the garage, where the dossier sat in triplicate on an old workbench. "They're escalating because they smell danger." "Good. Let's light the room." The plan wasn't flashy. It was simple: presence, witnesses, and angles. Marcus borrowed 3 extra doorbell cameras and mounted them at clean sightlines: porch, driveway, and the maple at the curb with a battery pack tucked behind the mulch ring. Carol aimed her phone from the 2nd-story window across the street. The young couple put a GoPro in their mailbox with the slot open. Daniel parked his sedan half a block away and ran a live stream to the cloud from a dash-mounted lens. There would be no, he said, left standing. They didn't have to wait long. The fake cops like Thursdays. Fines posted on Thursdays ruined weekends. Just past 3, the SUV fishtailed around the corner and braked at the curb in front of Marcus's house. 2 men climbed out, stocky and smirk. Marcus had labeled them in his notes. Stocky strode up the walk with a ticket already filled out. Smirk lagged behind, scanning for cameras, his jaw set. Marcus opened the door before the first knock landed. He had shaved. He wore a plain polo and jeans, an American flag on the porch behind him, as ordinary as a brochure. "Gentlemen," he said, voice even. "Can I help you?" "Violation," Stocky announced, trying to look past him into the living room. "Unauthorized surveillance equipment." He pointed at the doorbell cam with a pen. "Against HOA privacy guidelines." Marcus let the silence hang until Stocky's pen tip quivered. "In Georgia," he said, "a person may record on their own property. You are on mine. State law protects this." Smirk snorted. "We are authorized." Marcus tilted his head. "By who?" "Association enforcement." Stocky lifted the clipboard like a shield. "Let's see your badges," Marcus said. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. Every lens captured everything. Smirk flashed his laminate so fast it might as well have been a playing card. Stocky didn't even pretend. "You want to play lawyer, Holloway? We can lien your place. We can shut off your water." "Can you, though?" Marcus asked softly. "Because we've pulled county records. We've called utilities. We've checked with the registered HOA. There is no enforcement arm. There are no contracts. There are no liens recorded from your entity. What is it this week? Brookstone Accountability Partners, LLC?" Smirk's left eyelid flicked. "A tell." Daniel's camera caught it clean as a confession. Neighbors began to drift toward sidewalks, not close enough to crowd, just close enough to count. Across the street, Carol's curtains eased back further. The teenager with the orange soda stood by the maple. Elena's photographer, pretending to walk a dog, paused 3 houses down and knelt to tie a shoe that didn't need tying. Time stretched. Cicadas started up in the heat. "Here's how this goes," Stocky said finally, pen stabbing at the air. "You take down the cameras and you pay your fines. Or we come back with a tow truck and a work crew, and we start removing non-compliant fixtures. Doorbells. Flags. Whatever." "That's theft," Marcus said. "And impersonation. And extortion, if a prosecutor's in a good mood." "Big words," Smirk muttered, stepping up onto the porch. His shoulder brushed the flag bracket. Denise, inside, drew a breath he could hear through the door. Marcus's voice thinned to ice. "Do not take another step onto this porch." Smirk smiled. "Make me." He lifted a hand toward the camera, 2 fingers extended as if to pluck it from the siding. 3 things happened at once. The porch light snapped on, daylight be damned, it flared like a stage cue. The maple camera's lithium pack chimed as it hit 100% and the tiny LED winked. And from down the block, Daniel's voice, not loud, not a shout, just present, carried, "Deputies are en route." Smirk froze. Stocky's pen lowered. Marcus never moved. He had already dialed 911 on speaker and laid the phone on the entry table inside. The dispatcher had heard every word. The call time now ran past 4 minutes. "Sir," the voice said in its professional calm, "for your safety, please remain on your property. Units are a minute out." The sound came first, 2 cruisers rounding the corner tight, tires whispering on asphalt. Blue strobes painted the sub's windows. The fake cops turned in sync like their necks were on a hinge. For the first time since the patrols began, Marcus watched something new enter their eyes, calculation collapsing into fear. Deputy Rose stepped out of the lead car, hand near his holster but relaxed. He took in the scene, the clustered neighbors, the cameras, the SUV with a hardware store light bar, 2 men on a porch where they didn't live, a black homeowner standing square in his own doorway. He didn't bark. He didn't swagger. He simply said, "Afternoon. IDs." Stocky tried swagger anyway. "We're with HOA enforcement. We've got authority here." Rowe didn't look at him. He looked at the laminate. Then he turned it sideways, then upside down, then handed it back with 2 fingers like it was damp. "This isn't government issued. It isn't county. It isn't state. It isn't anything." Smirk gestured at the clipboard. "We've got violations." "Uh-huh," Rowe said, unimpressed. He nodded at Marcus. "Sir, you called?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus Holloway. These men have trespassed repeatedly, issued fake citations, threatened utility shutoffs, and assaulted my wife on this porch 3 weeks ago. Rose's eyes cut to Denise through the glass. She lifted the ice pack she still used at night for the lingering ache and lowered it again. He tapped his shoulder. "MIC dispatch, start me a supervisor and a fraud unit. Also see if we can reach DA intake. We may have a live one." The second deputy, a woman with her hair pulled tight and eyes that missed nothing, had already walked the fake light bar, the expired tag, the aftermarket push bumper with a bolt missing. "Sir," she said to Stocky, "step off the porch." Smirk didn't. He kept his weight planted, chin up, as if this were a contest you won by posture. Rose's voice didn't change. "Don't make today harder." Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was panic. Smirk moved, not down, but forward, a single aggressive half step. It was small enough to defend and big enough to decide the rest of his day. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't need to. Roe did. In a blur of calm practice, the deputy pivoted, guided Smirk's wrist, and placed him flat against the porch column. The crack of cuff ratchets sounded like punctuation. Stocky's hands rose a beat later. No drama. Just mechanics. Neighbors didn't cheer. They exhaled. The sound of relief is its own language. The supervisor arrived, then a detective in plain clothes who introduced himself as Barrera and talked like a man paid to assume nothing. He separated everyone: Marcus by the porch, Denise on the steps, Carol at her curb, Daniel by his sedan. Statements were taken. Numbers exchanged. Elena's photographer kept his distance until Barrera waved him closer and said, "Stay outside the tape and don't get cute." The GoPro was pulled from the mailbox. The Maple Cam's footage uploaded on its own like a confession flying to the cloud. On the tailgate of Rose's cruiser, Barrera spread out the clipboard violations. The LLC names didn't match across forms. The letterheads looked like a teenager's Canva draft. The Compliance Central number routed to a prepaid handset found in the SUV's console. A receipt in the cup holder showed purchases: vinyl decals, a dash light, stick-on patches. When the supervisor keyed the SUV's plate into his terminal, it returned to a rental company 3 counties over. The contract listed a fake address. Barrera didn't smile, but his eyebrows lifted 0.5 millimeter. To an investigator, clean lines are rare. This one had lines you could trace with chalk. "We are going to seize the vehicle," he said quietly to Roe. "Impersonation, attempted fraud, probable cause on the assault, maybe more once we chase the money." Smirk, cuffed and sweating, tried one last time to conjure control. "You don't get what's at stake here. People need order." Barrera looked at him like a bored teacher. "Son, you're not order. You're a costume." They read rights. They catalogued props. They put both men in the back of separate cars. No victory lap. No theatrics. Just the procedural gravity of real authority coming to plant its flag where fake authority had squatted too long. When the cruisers finally rolled, the neighborhood didn't rush the porch. People stayed where they were, as if afraid breathing too loudly might break whatever spell had lifted. Marcus turned to Denise. The set of his shoulders softened for the first time in weeks. She touched his cheek and whispered, "You didn't raise your voice." He shook his head. "Didn't need to." Elena approached, MIC down at her side. "I'll run this carefully," she said. "No names without permission. But the pattern matters. Others will see it, in other neighborhoods." Marcus nodded. "Make it about the pattern. Fear wears lots of uniforms." That night, the Greenbelt felt different. Kids chased each other between the oaks again. Someone rolled a grill onto a driveway and the smell of charcoal drifted down Brockton Court like a memory trying to come home. Daniel stayed late on Marcus's porch, boots up on the step, a beer sweating in his hand that he mostly forgot to drink. "They'll roll up the rest of the ring," he said. "Follow the cash. Hit the accounts. You'll probably get asked to testify." "I'll testify," Marcus said. The word didn't taste like vengeance. It tasted like closure. Before bed, he walked the fence line one more time. The letters were gone to the eye, but under the right angle of porch light he could still see where the paint had stained the grain. Scars don't vanish. They learn to live with you. He ran his palm along the wood, felt the roughness where the worst of the solvent had bitten, and thought about 1,000 small moments that had led to this: a clipboard lifted like a badge, a hand raised like a weapon, a neighborhood trained to lower its eyes. Across the street, Carol flicked her porch light on and off twice, a signal they'd agreed on weeks ago to mean "we are with you." Other porches followed, steady little blinks up and down the block, like fireflies choosing to stay. Marcus lifted 2 fingers from his side in a small salute he'd used a lifetime ago and never thought he'd use again at home. The lights stilled. The street exhaled. In the morning, there would be calls from Barrera and from Elena and probably from someone at the DA's office with questions that sounded clinical and necessary. There would be paperwork and perhaps a press conference and certainly angry emails from people who hadn't been there but had strong opinions anyway. None of that changed the one thing he'd needed most: the badges had fallen. Not because he'd swung, but because he'd stood, and because others had stood with him. He went inside. Denise had left the porch light on. He didn't turn it off. Morning sunlight always hit Brookstone a little later, filtered through the pines that lined the ridges around the subdivision. On that morning, though, the light felt different. It wasn't the weather, it was the weight that had shifted. The black SUV was gone. The patrols were over. The men with their fake clipboards and laminate IDs were in custody. Yet Marcus Holloway knew, like every veteran who's ever survived the first shot, that victory in the moment didn't mean the war was done. Detective Barrera called first. His voice was clipped but satisfied. "Mr. Holloway, the 2 individuals we took into custody have been booked on charges of impersonating officers, fraud, and attempted extortion. We are also investigating the assault on your wife. We'll need her formal statement." Denise gave it without hesitation. She described the slap in detail, her tone steady, her eyes dry. It wasn't about reliving pain anymore, it was about naming it, stamping it into the record where it could no longer be denied. Barrera nodded through her testimony. "You've given us more than we usually get in a case like this," he said. "Video, witnesses, documents. It's airtight." But airtight didn't mean over. By the weekend, a new tension simmered. The men in custody weren't lone wolves. Bank records traced through the prepaid phone accounts and rental SUV pointed to an LLC registered 3 towns over. "Shell companies," Barrera explained. "Someone financed this. Someone profited. And someone might still try to pick up where the first 2 left off." Marcus understood. In the military, cutting off a patrol didn't end the insurgency. It just forced it to change shape. Elena Foster's article ran that Sunday. Headline: "Impostors in Uniform, How Fake HOA Police Exploited Fear in Georgia Suburbs." The story hit harder than Marcus expected. It wasn't just about Brookstone. She'd found whispers of similar schemes in 2 other counties, copycats who used the same tactics: intimidation, fake fines, threats of liens. She tied it all together with interviews, including Denise's quiet but searing line: "They thought fear would keep us quiet. But fear can't live in daylight." The Ledger's servers nearly crashed from the clicks. Bigger outlets picked it up. By Monday, Atlanta stations were running the footage of Smirk getting cuffed against Marcus's porch column. The sight of a fake cop folded by a real deputy became the image of the week. Neighbors who had once avoided Marcus now stopped him at the mailbox, shaking his hand, pressing pies into Denise's arms, muttering apologies for their silence. Some looked guilty. Some looked relieved. All looked different. It wasn't instant, but Brookstone felt lighter. Kids rode bikes without parents scanning every passing car. Porch lights glowed late into the night without envelopes tucked under doors. The retired teacher hung her wind chimes again. The young couple brought back their Christmas lights, even though July heat made them absurd. At the first HOA meeting after the arrests, attendance tripled. Real board members, those who had signed up to keep the pool clean and the trash schedule posted, stood awkwardly at the front, realizing they had never wielded power but had unwittingly allowed imposters to fill the vacuum. Marcus sat in the back row, Denise's hand resting on his. When neighbors demanded stricter oversight, new elections, and open accounting, he didn't rise to lead. He just nodded. Sometimes leadership meant knowing when the baton was already moving forward without you. Late one night, long after Denise had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone on the porch. The cicadas sang. His security cameras blinked steady green lights. He scrolled through saved files on his laptop: the spray paint, the slap, the smirks, the arrests. Evidence of darkness, now frozen in pixels. Daniel joined him, beer in hand. "You know you could walk away now," he said. "They are done. The neighborhood's safe." Marcus shook his head. Safe isn't enough. Not if it's just here. People in other towns are still living this. Daniel exhaled, staring into the trees. Then what? You gonna be the guy who takes on every fake cop in Georgia? Not every, Marcus said, his voice calm but certain. Just the next one. And the next. Until they learn people aren't afraid anymore. For a long moment, the two men sat in silence, listening to the night. Weeks later, Marcus testified in court. He spoke slowly, carefully, every word measured like it was an oath. He didn't rail against the men who slapped his wife or spray-painted his fence. He simply laid out the truth, what they had done, how they had done it, and why it mattered. The courtroom, filled with neighbors, journalists, and strangers, was quiet. When Denise took the stand, her testimony closed the circle. The judge, after handing down sentences that would keep the impostors behind bars for years, added a remark that wasn't in the script. This community stood up together, he said. That matters. It reminds us all that justice doesn't only happen in court. It happens on porches, in kitchens, and in the courage to say no when fear tells you to stay quiet. One evening, Marcus walked the block with Denise. The kids were playing tag again, their laughter carrying into the twilight. Porch lights clicked on one by one, like beacons instead of warnings. Carol waved from her steps. The teenager with the soda raised his hand in a half salute. Marcus squeezed Denise's fingers. See that? He murmured. She looked at him. What? He nodded toward the houses. That's what we fought for. Not the fence, not the fines. This. For the first time in months, Denise smiled without the weight behind it. And Marcus, the man who had spent a lifetime in other people's battles, realized this was the one that mattered most. Not because of victory, not because of headlines, but because he had proven that even when authority wears a mask, truth can strip it bare. The badges had fallen. And Brookstone was free.